for this round. Congratulations to both the teams for making this far. Before we move further, I would like to ask my fellow panelists to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Jeremiah. He, him, thank you.
Hello, this is Pauline. I'm a panelist for this round. Good luck.
Hi, this is Aabis Naqvi. I'll be the panelist for this round. Best of luck to both the teams.
Hi, I'm Aditya, panelist for this round. Congratulations for reaching the finals. Best of luck for the debate. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, everyone. So, the motion for this round is that as parents of a middle class family, we would adopt the principles of tiger parenting. With that being said, I would like to call upon the first affirmative speaker to open their case. Here.
Thank you, everyone here. Testing, can everyone hear me?
Yes, you're audible.
Thank you. Let's start by characterizing what this debate is not about. This debate is not about abusive parents who are bad to their children, for example, fat shaming them. This is because this debate is one in which the actor is already specified, and we have quite a lot of latitude in this debate to determine how tiger parenting is carried out, i.e., through things like schedules, through things like control over their lives, through things like imposing curfews. This is also not a debate about the societal impacts of this. Rather, it's a debate about tiger parenting's impact on the average child and the average family in a country. What then is tiger parenting? Tiger parenting is not dictatorial parenting. It is much more nuanced than opposition is likely to suggest. It is going to consider things like individual circumstances. For example, if your child, for instance, is clearly not someone inclined into academics at the age of 12 and does not go into a top school, you won't say that child is going to go to Harvard, for example. At the end of the day, tiger parenting is about what we talked about earlier. It's about creating some norms from the point of birth about how the parent-child relationship is like. I want to characterize two more things in this section. Firstly, what is the priority for parents? The priority of parents is not for their kid to become their friend. Insofar as this is done by other figures, such as friends, counselors, teachers, people in wider life, the role of the parent is to prepare a child for adulthood. The thing that a parent wants most from their child is for their child to be happy, for their child to be successful. Insofar as prioritizing the outcome of the child is the most important thing in this debate, what is also important is minimizing the level of risk in that realm. So, for example, the key things that a parent cares about in a child is that child, for instance, not having the worst of harms. What then is the comparative on their side of the house? The comparative on their side of the house is likely going to be one with liberal parenting, weak parenting, or hands-off parenting, i.e., a parent giving their child as much latitude as possible. What does this mean? This means that their side must answer key questions in this debate. If their child goes out late at night without telling the parent, if they take a toy from another child, if they kick someone in the schoolyard, if the parent finds photos, perhaps a little obscene ones, on their phone, what does the parent do? Do they impose curfew? Do they give confiscations? Or what exactly are the kinds of modus operandi that parents are expected to adopt? That is the key question opposition one must answer with regard to their counterfactual. Now then, first argument, why tiger parenting is effective. Tiger parenting is effective for three reasons. Firstly, because it actually eliminates the worst of harms. On the outside of the house, we come out the absolute worst possible harms when we actually protect the child from possible risks that do exist and are very real in society. Things, for instance, like child grooming are completely not out of the with our policy, because what we do as parents is that we actually monitor their social media and make sure they don't do that sort of thing. When a parent knows where their child is at any moment in time, that is where we make sure our child does not wander into the streets at night and therefore end up being risk of kidnap, therefore having the risk of many other things that are far worse. At the end of the day, as a parent, these things might only have a 1% chance or even lower of happening, but they are far more important than any other thing in this debate because they are certain when they happen. It is certain to cause harm to you and your child and certain to cause immense levels of guilt afterwards. Compared to any other harms on their side, those are speculative. At the end of the day, as parents, we are conservative and risk-taking because the child is the most important thing in our life. And we think that this is an argument that you should therefore credit. Secondly, tiger parenting works for children because it builds key skills. At the end of the day, tiger parenting teaches you like learning discipline, independence, planning, managing tasks from a very young age. There are two reasons why tiger parenting provides unique benefits. Firstly, because it comes from your parents, the person that is most proximate to a child, and the person from whom the child is most likely to accept such guidance. This is not the kind of guidance they are willing to accept from a random person down the street. Secondly, because these atomic habits are things which are built from young, because these are things that can only be instilled at the age of 4 or 5 years old, otherwise your ability to harness those things become harder later in life. These are benefits, therefore, unique to tiger parenting, not achieved through any other institution or body. Moreover, if their side says that rebelliousness is a part of tiger parenting, we agree. And that is something that we think is extremely natural on the part of children as well. It also builds up their ability to negotiate, for example, stand up for their own needs, speak to their parents, communicate. Those are actually things that we believe are important as well. Therefore, aside from carving out the worst possible harms, we allow children to better be able to deal with the outside world, with the challenges of adulthood that many children right now are currently unable to face. If their side's metric in this debate is parents having more control of their children, we expect parents have more control over their children over the course of their lives if their child is not prepared for adulthood. Our policy allows children to be much better prepared. Finally, we set a child up for general success in the future. This includes things, for instance, like being able to go to university, being able to cope with living alone in that scenario, because you're now actually in that. We actually think that because it's a middle class family, this is exceptionally important. A middle class family cannot rely on inheritance and cannot rely on good fortune or good luck. We think that therefore the best way of being able to gain social mobility in such a society is through that method. At the end of the day, their side might suggest that optionality is important, giving the child some freedom. Suspect that freedom is far more important when you are 30 than when you are 3, because that is when you have reached your most self-actualized stage. On our side, if your child is able to go to college, which they have a higher chance of doing with much better habits and skills on the outside of the house, they can become anything they want. They can become an artist, a journalist, a doctor, whatever they want to do. At the point at which they drop out, at the point at which they don't have that same level of discipline, a lot of paths close up to them in the future. Therefore, what have we proven to you at the end of this argument? Firstly, that we carve out absolute worst harms which we should care about as a conservative parent. Secondly, that we are able to build key skills in our children that prepare them for adulthood. Finally, we protect the optionality. We win on these three metrics. Second argument then, on how our side improves the parent-child relationship. On our side of the house, we tell you that it's very unlikely that children will be repelled by their parents. This is because they are really likely socialized into such a scenario from young. They really believe that tiger parenting is something which is a social norm for them. It's unlikely that they will be rebellious. But here's the thing. Children all go through puberty. It's a biological fact of their lives. The key question is, how do we cope with the increased amount of restlessness that we get from them? Under our side, when there are clear norms that have already been set from young, this is when we are able to ensure, for instance, a level of obedience, and therefore the parent-child relationship is likely to be less rocky because there's already a sense of whose voice is more important in that scenario. In the death of the house, parents will be unable to find themselves to put their foot down in any stance that they take, because oftentimes it's expected that kids are actually the ones who have an important say as well. Therefore, under our side of the house, we actually keep rebelliousness in check and therefore ensure the parent-child relationship is better. And outside of the house, we actually think that close interaction is more likely between parent and child. In the alternative, where parents want to give their child all the leeway they can, they are less likely to see each other, have that kind of contact, have the kind of communication, which is important for building a parent-child relationship in the long run. That's what we get under our side of the house. Finally, some pre-battle to work their side is likely to suggest. Firstly, their side might suggest that this is extremely stressful for the child. Insofar as we've already suggested that this is likely to be a nuanced method of child rearing and parenting, we think that many of the key skills that we give to children allow them to cope with that increased level of stress as well. For instance, scheduling. Secondly, it might suggest kids are likely to hide stuff away from their parents. We suggest this is something that's natural for all kids, likely want to be symmetrical under their side, insofar as there's this social norm of keeping secrets, for example. But we think that actually under our side of the house, if there are harmful secrets, for example, secrets that might be harmful to their child themselves, we are able to make sure that those things are nipped in the bud. Finally, they suggest expectations are too high. We think actually having high expectations sometimes is fine, because the worst thing you can do for a child's self-esteem is sometimes to not believe in them, for them to think that you don't think they can succeed. Under our side of the house, we give them the confidence to be able to do so. We are proud to propose.
Thanking the speaker for the very fine speech, calling upon the first negative speaker to open their case. Hear, hear.
Hi, am I audible as well as visible?
Yes, you are.
Just give me a second, I'll set up my timer and start. All right, I'll start off with my speech on the self count of three, two, one. Parents are quite integral to the lives of children and vice versa. We prefer a world where there's going to be much better parent-child relationship, and we agree with government. The future of the child and the child's holistic development is crucial for the parent. We are going to prove why both of those things are better. Before any of this, a strategic observation regarding affirmative's case. Note that they've gone ahead and taken an extremely soft stance, and they've tried to hide that under the garb of nuances in parenting, because their stance is something which contradicts the context slide completely, because the context slide talks about huge control taking place and compulsory methods where there's going to be positive and negative reinforcement, which is to say that, and it's insofar as they're also true that these parents are conservative, which is to say that when these particular parents of middle class family, their own parents went ahead and taught them things in ways where holistic parenting, like you going ahead and being able to debate and play volleyball as well as study for like a couple of hours, was not really a thing, which is to say the high achievement they'll push you is most likely going to be the achievement which has been ingrained in the minds of the parents at all points in time from generations and generations on. And insofar as that is going to be largely conservative, they will push you to go ahead and go to Harvard. We think that's an unrealistic comparative which they are trying to push on our side. Then, what exactly is the key piece of framing within this debate? Middle class parents, what do those look like? Four things. First, in terms of economic conditions, we think you aren't too rich, but you aren't poor. You're an average individual, so you probably go ahead and work a 9 to 5, and you're bang on in the middle. Secondarily, in terms of schooling, you also didn't go to like a really good high quality school, but you went to probably what looks like an average regional school, etc., like local schools, etc. But number three, we think in most middle class families, to sustain your livelihood in terms of affording education for your children, healthcare, housing, etc., you have taken some amount of debt. But fourthly, and more importantly, insofar as you come from a conservative setup, as affirmative agrees, your parents have gone ahead and, like the parents of the actor, like the grandparents basically, have also gone ahead and pushed conservative ideas on you. But you have failed as a parent because you haven't succeeded. You're an average parent, which is to say, when you're bang on in the middle, you haven't necessarily gone ahead and seen the success which your parents already wanted you to go ahead and see. Which is to say, insofar as you have failed in your grandparents' expectations, you are hardwired to go ahead and think in a unidimensional way, which is to say, you go ahead and hardwire to think of success in only one direction. But the reason why this becomes crucial in this debate is another piece of characterization, which you as parents know. You as parents know that time has changed and the world is becoming largely dynamic. And you also have not been successful in keeping up with that dynamic and ever changing world and capitalistic society, right? Which is to say, you don't have the most useful and updated knowledge of the world and various fields which exist in it, like education, finance, etc., because you only know of the value systems you grew up with, but you also secondarily know that these aren't sufficient. Which is to say that insofar as you know that you haven't been extremely successful in your value systems and your average, but as a parent, you always want best for your child and always want better, what's the most likely comparative then? We think at all points in time, you also realize that there is a need for newer methods, skills, etc., to take place, which is why we disagree with affirmative. They say that there's going to be liberal and hands-off parenting. We think that there's going to be reasonable form of parenting which takes place, which is comparatively going to be more holistic in nature. What do we go ahead and talk about? We think that the need of the hour right now, which the parents also understand, is that new exposure to things like various career paths, since they've expanded exponentially since probably when the parents got into the job market. There's a need for new opportunities to be there, and you being exposed to those, you being exposed to new ideas, etc. Because no, now note, in the present world, there is no one form of success which actually takes place, and you can achieve success in multiple ways. Which is to say, then, on a comparative, insofar as two things happen. First, you have internalized all form of conservative ideas. Secondarily, you realize the needs of the new world. You're going to be a parent who governs their kid in a middle ground sort of a criteria, which is to say, you will do reasonable form of parenting. You will not be too liberal, but you will not be too strict as well, as an outcome of this balance, which we've gone ahead and talked about. Which is to say, you will not want your child and push them to be number one in the class. You're okay with them being in the top 10, which is to say, then at all points in time, you'll not be too liberal, you'll have the middle ground. But secondarily and most importantly, there there's going to be progressive parenting which takes place on our side, because you as a parent know that the involvement needed at the age of 5 to the age of 10 and age of 18 are something which are quite different. So progressively you're going to go ahead and let go of this control on our side, which goes ahead and looks like at age 10 or at age 5 you're probably more involved, and at age 15 you're less involved, etc. Right? First thing then we're going to go ahead and prove is just why exactly is the child of the life bursts off uniquely on affirmative. Note that key piece of framing for this is that child is someone who is extremely malleable when they are young and impressionable, and the most proximate structures to this child are the parents, because of the like extent of interaction they have with them is the maximum in terms of the hours they spend, etc. Right? First thing as an outcome of high achievement and expectations is this: in scenario one, when you don't go ahead and fulfill these expectations, given the fact that the world is hyper competitive and literally 1% go ahead and literally in a class of 80 students or 70, 50 students, whatever, there can only be one person who is the topper, right? Which is to say it's extremely difficult to go ahead and fulfill these expectations even when your parents are trying the hardest. What happens on affirmative is that you go ahead and internalize all of these failures and feel that you are not good enough as an outcome of the fact that you know that my parents are trying their best and they are being as involved as possible. We think on our side, on the comparative, when the parents give you some sort of autonomy and control, you don't go ahead and completely blame it on yourself, because you know that there are ways you can go ahead and improve and there are other structures you can go ahead and blame this failure on. But then the consequence of this on affirmative looks like you being able to go ahead and not only get punishment for failing, which is extremely likely because of negative reinforcement, which is mentioned in the context side, but also secondarily you just have self-esteem issues because you will go ahead and think that you are insufficient. Secondarily, affirmative talks about how parents will teach you skills. That's an extremely soft stance. You can have that on our side as well when parents are reasonable with you. What happens on affirmative is more stronger in terms of compulsory schedules, etc. Right? What happens inevitably, and this is important, when the child grows up, they just don't know how to operate without you, because their entire childhood, everything from their day-to-day routine, schedules, their interactions, etc., all of those are pre-decided, predetermined, and already laid out for them. So now, when they are out of tiger parenting and are an adult, they just don't know how to operate, because now they have to do all of these things on their own. On our side, with progressive parenting, they can naturally go ahead and learn all of these things. But also note, learning real world interactions and skills only happen when you let them actually let go of some sort of control, let them actually experience some form of controlled failure, which can comparatively be safer. You don't let them go out at 1 a.m., but you can let them go out at probably like 7, 8 a.m. and like figure out how they can go ahead and navigate through the world, etc. Right? In terms of like playing sports, whatever. We think that sort of autonomy control lets them build these skill sets naturally, because the world is dynamic and you need the child to be able to deal with dynamic environments. But thirdly, we think parent-child relationship, even if you go ahead and succeed on affirmative, just becomes worse because of multiple reasons. First, we think with an increase in expectation like homework, curfews, etc., there's less leeway to exercise autonomy. What happens on their comparative is that you become more resentful and you feel that you're suffocated because you weren't able to exercise any of your autonomy on their side, which you just don't feel that way because you can exercise autonomy on our side, right? But secondarily, you feel like you have lived an extremely restricted childhood and you cannot necessarily go ahead and enjoy it at any way, shape, or form. We think that the parents, and you'll always blame them for actually taking away the enjoyment out of their childhood, which is why, and for many more reasons, parent-child relationship becomes worse. Proud to negate.
Thanking the speaker for their very fine speech, calling upon the second affirmative speaker, here, here.
So,
Yes, could you please be a bit louder? If possible?
oh, sure, great. Yeah. This setup is the most productive. Sorry. Oh, wow. That's wow. Can I start my speech?
Yeah, it's thank you.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Second negative, if you're listening to this, answer these 2 questions at the start of your speech. When your kid is talking to a stranger and your kid is 10, what are you going to tell them? When your kid insists on going out until late in the morning and is unable to find their way back, what are you going to tell them? Important questions that we hear that we don't see answered at the end of first negative speech, because they want to toe the balance between both sides without actually getting the benefits of either. 2 points of contention for the house today. The first on the parent-child relationship, secondly, of what's best for the child.
The first thing that I want to know on the parent-child relationship, and the thing I want to know at the start of this, is that they're actually incredibly uncomparative to all of the material that comes out from Caleb. Because Caleb gives you multiple reasons as to why individuals tend, or why parents tend to prioritize things that are not just parent-child relationship stuff. I'll give you a very convincing thing. Parents are often quite self-sacrificial in nature. They're willing to sacrifice their relationship with their child in order to gain better benefits for their child. The simple reason for this is because a lot of parents right now believe that there's quite a high possibility in which children will distance from them in the future because of things like nursing homes, because of a lot of ways in which there are generational divides, etc. And so parents probably don't put a lot of certainty in the fact that there's going to be a very close parent-child relationship going into the future. What parents often want from the onset is what's best for the child, and they're willing to sacrifice the parent-child relationship for that. In fact, Caleb gives you two more things that parents tend to prioritize that goes completely unanswered in first negative speech. The first is that parents tend to prioritize control quite heavily. That is to say that because they care so much about their child, because they put so much time, so much effort, so much love into developing their child from young, they probably want to ensure that they have their child within eye's reach. The simple reason for this is things like biology, right? Like back in the days when people had like cavemen, you probably wanted to see your kid because you didn't want your kid to be eaten by a boar, and so you probably keep your kid within eyesight so your kid wouldn't die. The same thing applies here. I mean, not in the same primitive sense, but the same logic applies here. That is to say that parents still heavily prioritize control, so they always know what's going on with their child. So they're always assured that their child isn't succumbing to the very bad things that we told you in Caleb. The second thing is that they tend to be risk averse. First negative tries to confuse the idea of conservatism. It's not the same thing. Risk averse means that you want to avoid the worst possible circumstances that happens to an individual. Caleb tells you about the people who go out at night. There are people who subscribe to vices from young. The incredibly horrible examples that can only be stopped by a direct control over things like scheduling, direct control over things like, social media. Which means that even if we buy Negative's case, that they can balance the idea of control and balance the idea of liberal parenting, they still cannot achieve the same level of control on the outside. And so therefore, they necessarily lose on both of these metrics of control and risk aversion. This therefore means that they're already on the back foot because parents don't just prioritize the things that they talk about. There are probably a large amount of other things that they care about that they don't talk about. But I'm going to go one step further. In fact, Caleb tells you at the start of the speech that parents want certainty on the onset. Anything that negative tells you in the first negative speech, panel, you must listen to this. Anything negative tells you is necessarily speculative. You have no idea as to whether your child is going to react in this way. You have no idea if your child is going to hate you. You have no idea if your child is going to get stifled. The only thing you know on the onset of parenthood is the idea of control. The idea that you want to know that regardless of what happens, you are always in control and you always know what's going to happen to your child. That is fundamentally important and unshakable on the outside. But I'll go one step further. There's often an optimism bias that parents have. And this cuts out a lot of things that negative tells you. Because parents tend to be quite complacent, they tend to think that they can parent well. So if opposition's claim is that parents can't parent well, parents tend to believe they can, and so the complacency still exists for them to do so. In fact, when negative tells you things like parents care about conservative values and so therefore will apply them, yeah, that's perfectly fine. Parents care about conservative values, and so they're probably fine with imparting them as well, insofar that that's within the actor's desires. Right. Let's go back to the idea of the parent-child stuff. The main thing they want to hit us on in false negative is the idea that this is a soft stance. This is not a soft stance. It is quite a realistic stance. Many people tiger parent in the status quo. People can control individuals while still being nuanced, while still communicating with people to understand whether the control looks like. It looks like, for example, tempering your expectations if you feel they are unrealistic. It looks, for example, talking to your child, noticing signs of them like potentially doing bad things themselves and being able to regulate your actions such that you don't push them to this extent. We think that insofar as parents are caring, and I think parents are caring considering we are the parents within this debate, parents are likely to still care about their children's safety regardless. Secondly, on the idea of values, parents tend to get more progressive over time. Like clearly values are not rigid. Even if my parents or my grandparents are subscribing to like traditional values, I am probably not going to subscribe to the same tradition. Not always going to subscribe to the same traditional values. I can probably think for myself, as they rightly point out, as to what the new world really desires. The third thing is that even if it's restrictive, parents are just happier for these reasons. Even if the parent-child relationship deteriorates, as already stated in my preamble, it's probably still a fine thing. The last thing is that this is unresponsive to all the alternatives that Caleb tells you. The idea of friends, the idea of family, the idea of oftentimes many different mature and paternal and like other like older figures within your life, like teachers and counselors and even family friends, etc. Insofar as an average person, an average probably has one of these mechanisms, they're probably still able to outvent and they're still able to vent out these concerns regardless. So that point doesn't really stand. The second, which is best for the child? The first thing that I want to know at the top of this idea is that the needs for the new world is symmetric. Like both sides and both parents on both sides recognize that the world is changing and that parents or like children need different things, right? So if you recognize that a certain job is becoming more prevalent or a certain path of life is becoming more acceptable, you're likely going to tiger parent in that way as well, or you're likely to accommodate that within the way you tiger parent because you recognize that there's something that can be changed towards. Secondly, they are implicitly conceding to our model because they are literally accepting the fact that they're accepting the fact by saying that they want to do both at once, that there is a merit to control or there is a merit to stop people in a certain case. So why not go all the way? We don't really get the understanding as to why there's a consistent stance. But let's take them at their best. What if children are really stifled and do really suffer? 2 points of contention, or 2 main ways I want to deal with this. The first is that they're often socialized and normalized into this scenario. What does this mean? It means if your parent is probably quite restrictive towards yourself, or like quite taking away your control, like they take away your Xbox on weekends. I mean, I lived when Xbox was played, but yeah, when they take away these on your weekends, people are probably willing to react to this. There's probably going to be like an outburst of anger where you're like, why do you take away these things? I'm so angry at my parents. But after that, they're probably going to be like, well, yeah, and they're probably going to adapt to it because that's how humans tend to adapt to bad situations. And so there tends to be a normalization and socialization on the outside, which means that the worst excesses are carved out. But secondly, you can probably temper your outbursts via a bunch of other metrics, like other people you can vent to, or you can, if their metric is that they have no one to blame but themselves, they tend to just blame their parents for having too high expectations of themselves. And so it does not necessarily all bottle out by the individual. The third thing here is the independence rebuttal. And this comes up quite big within false negative speech. The idea that there's an independence of individuals, and so therefore that's a good thing. Recognize that there are many opportunities for independent time, like your school time, for example. Even if your schedules are determined, you have like 8-12 hours at school, 5 days a week, where you can talk to friends and do whatever you want and go for CCAs. So that's probably still fine in outside. And there are probably other mechanisms that you can do to escape as well. Things like boarding school, for example, or eventually going to college and university. All of these things still apply. Therefore, at the end of this clash, you will believe that parents don't always care about the priorities that false negative tells you, and ultimately, they don't actually ensure what's best for the child because they listen to absolutely nothing of what Caleb tells you as to the benefits that tiger parenting is able to accrue. We brought to you 3 ideas. The first, they're forced away from bad influences. And this is the most important outcome in this debate because parents are risk averse. Even if there's a 1% scenario that their child can slip into gangs or slip into self-harm, they want to avoid that via all costs. Therefore, insofar there's even a chance, if you relax control, your child can slip down that path, you will never do that on our side or like on both sides. So therefore, there's always going to be something that benefits and has better outcomes for us. The second is that they're more willing to gain skills. So for example, more willing to gain things like resilience and adaptability when they're within these scenarios. Lastly, and most importantly, they gain better grades, better social mobility, and this leads to agency in the future. No response against first negative as to the weighing that we gave you in Caleb. The idea that agency is more important when you're old than when you're young. Therefore, there's still a better benefit towards individuals. The last thing I want to say in this speech is the sliding scale of age. What does this mean? It means that most tiger parenting tends to happen when you are young, when you are least independent and least able to feel rebellious. This means that there's the most amount of piano classes you're signed up for, most amount of tuition classes you're signed up for in kindergarten. As you increase your age, you increase the ability to rationalize, like to be rebellious, but you're also more able to gain independence as well. You're more able to rationalize the benefits of tiger parenting and more willing to say, yeah, I just didn't know better when I was a child. Because of these reasons, you just think that you should go with
Thanking the speaker for the very fine speech, calling upon second negative speaker. Here.
Just give me 20 seconds. I hope I'm audible as well as visible.
Yes, you are.
Starting speech in 3, 2, 1. When a 10-year-old talks to a stranger, what is going to be the parent's reaction is the only valid question side affirmative raises in this debate. I have 2 simple answers to that. The simple answer to that is that situationally, basic and average parents do step in order to go and mold their child to safety, in order to get them to actual safety. That means there are 2 responses to this. First, because of all the biological reasons of love and connect with the child, which affirmative has already elaborating for me. But second, the active protection I want for my child are basic reasons why an average parent out there, not liberal or conservative, wants to protect their child from the worst forms of harms. And if on both sides, this average parent is aware about these potential harms to an average 10-year-old, on both sides, probably, or better on our side, because it's not tiger parenting at all points of time, you are still likely to tell your child about the potential dangers. And probably when you see the possibility that my child is 10 years old and I'm kind of suspecting that they are not going in the right direction, you will step in. This is a difference between situational and progressive parenting, which can be depending on situations, but active control over all micro elements of my life, which happens on side affirmative. This is where they have to bite the bullet. On affirmative, you don't only parent your child to protect them from the worst case scenarios in general, you start micro scheduling every little aspect of their child's life. This is the key difference, which means on our side, an average parent can realize the times to step in into their child's life and potentially help them, but let them be autonomous on the other side of life. But on their side, you control every little aspect. This sort of delta is something which side affirmative is going to have to bite before raising question in terms of how average parenting necessarily happens. But second, they say we're going to develop better social ability and skills necessary for the child. I have two responses to break this down. One, we think for social skills, the prerequisite is having autonomy to interact with newer opportunities and newer individuals on a regular basis. Insofar as your schedule is controlled by your parent in a unidimensional way, you don't have that opportunity. Why is it going to be unidimensional? Because even if on both sides parents are aware that the world is dynamic and probably being a good debater can actually lead you to good outcomes, on their side, they will have to choose that one thing which they think the child will be good at and pressurize them to schedule everything around the same thing. This is literally why tiger parenting of sports prodigies make their child do practice every single day for 6 hours from the age of 12 to 20. The problem with that is everything is so unidimensional that you don't allow your child to grow and actually explore anything beyond that one thing. The problem with that is that insofar as the interaction of the child are going to be in one bubble that you have unidimensionally created, the child is not going to have awareness in terms of how to adapt to different situations or how to adapt to different types of people and different types of environments. This is the reason why unidimensionality is necessarily bad for a child in any form of parenting, and by allowing them to try different things probably gives them a better adaptability to develop all these skills in terms of social awareness, what affirmative has mentioned. But secondly, all they talk about is certainty. Let me prove that to you. The only thing which is certain is that the parents currently are very aware of the fact of where they are right now. They're probably aware that, listen, the world has probably changed out there, and our metrics, which our parents probably use, are age old. And active control on something is not going to be the best idea. There is one simple reason for that. Because for active controls, you as a parent or you as any individual need to be sure of the metrics you're using to control the person or control the activities of the person. In this scenario, if Vrinda's characterization is true, which is unchallenged, and the parent has been exposed to newer ideas which the parent is unaware of, the metrics that the parent is going to use to control the child are not going to be foolproof, are not going to be something which are likely to succeed, because the parent themselves are not fully sure about these metrics at any point of time. Which is why we think a rational parent would not make a decision to tiger parent their child at any point of time, simply because they're aware that they don't know about all the nuances in today's world, which is why they would allow their child to probably want to go out and explore these things and step in only when it's required. But secondly, and most importantly, before I go forward to our positive case, we think most middle class parents are slogging out there to work day and night, which means at all points of time, they probably can't control every aspect of their lives and micro scheduling at all points of time, which means these parents are aware that they can never reach the best case impacts of tiger parenting if they can't step in during every micro interaction. Insofar as that is true, we think they're rational enough to allow their child and see it as a potential benefit rather, and allowing them to go and have a dynamic interaction with people rather than to have a world where they can't be fully controlled because you're so busy in developing your own life, but also not have the ability to go and interact with the world, which requires them with dynamic skills. The first thing I want to prove is that why is the parents' exposure to liberal ideology something which is so certain in this debate? Not through social media, news channels, etc. Parents of today's age are showcased the ideology of things like autonomy and things like interviews of children who come forward and say that, listen, I was protected in a bubble for 18 years and my parents have destroyed my life because they've not allowed me to be exposed in today's world to other ideologies. You know what's the first instinct which the parent wants to prioritize at that point in time? Self-protectionism, which is why as first argument is the most important. The internalized failure of your child necessarily translates to you feeling guilty as a parent at all points of times. If a child is likely to interact with liberal ideologies after they are 18 and after they go to college and they start realizing that people around me have been very liberal, or I've had the opportunity have some sort of autonomy, the first thing which they feel is absolute disgust, because they feel the people who are responsible for killing their lives and not allowing them the maximum opportunity is their parent, you know what's the possible reaction of the child? Two things. One, they would probably have detachment from the parent at all points of time. They would not want to interact with them at any point of time. But second, active blaming. They would blame their parent to put them in a position which allows them not to grow in the world because they're so behind other people who had the autonomy to explore multiple things and be good at multiple things, rather than them who's probably failed at the one thing which they were pressurized to do because they were never in a mental space to fully commit to it. The problem with that is you as a parent in status quo while making this decision are aware of this because you literally see active examples of this in social media within liberal ideologies coming to the forefront, which means you want to protect yourself from all these net harms, which is why we think it's a better decision to not do tiger parenting and allow your child to have some sort of autonomy. So in the worst case scenario, when your child does fail, he doesn't resent you as a parent, but probably learns through the failures and why the decision they made was probably a rationally bad decision to make, and probably have their parents as support structures in those situations, which means that the parent, you want to develop closer bonds in these critical situations with your child, which only happens if they don't resent you and blame you for the decision they made because they had no autonomy at that point of time. Which means the most certain thing we prove to you is if the parent is aware about all these dynamicities, they're probably going to internalize this failure if it happens in the future, which is why it's a rationally bad decision to make in order to go and allow your tiger parenting to necessarily take place. Secondly, on overdependence, because note very crucially, they say that, oh, on our side, you're going to learn new skills, which means you're not going to be over dependent on your parent. Plus, you'll eventually go to college, so it's necessarily fine. I want to break this down and win on the comparative on two levels. Firstly, note eventually college is just way too late, because when your child goes to the college and realizes that I don't know half the things, I don't know how the real world possibly works, they feel left behind. They feel everybody else is way ahead of them because they know how the real world works. They know how to go ahead and do basic things which this child doesn't, because they were so overly dependent on their parent making schedules for them, on their parent going and buying things for them, which means this sort of over dependence, even if it comes late, is going to be a big impact which affects the child. But if I bring it back to the actor, why do we comparatively win? All this overburdens the parent as well, because the parent possibly know that I'll have to continuously keep doing direct parenting till my child is at 25, because they are going to be over dependent on me, which means that affirmative can never win the clash on over dependence, because they can never prove why this form of eventuality in college will be enough for the child to adapt to today's changes. Which means, number one, on a telling you why internalized failure and guilt is the most likely reaction, and hence why self-protectionism for the parent to not allow the situation to arise is the most prior thing for the parent within this debate. But secondly, proving to you why on a comparative, social skills, social ability, it's very unlikely on side affirmative, because of the structural issues in the ways tiger parenting will never work in their world, because the metrics are so flawed. We are very proud to oppose and take this debate.
Thanking the speaker for the very fine speech, calling upon the third affirmative speaker here.
Hi, can I be heard?
Yes, loud and clear.
Oh, thank you very much. We'll begin in a couple of seconds. There were two issues in this speech. Firstly, about the welfare of the child from the perspective of the parent. Secondly, on the quality of parent-child relationships. Firstly, on the welfare of the child from the perspective of the parent, I want to hear very importantly that the parent chooses to make their parenting style, be it progressive parenting, whatever that may be, or tiger parenting, at every point in life across their parenting journey, including from the very start when they lay the very first expectation when the child is like 2 years old and says their first word. That is to say that this debate is not a retroactive debate, but looking at the average child after going through tiger parenting. It is rather the parent's subjective evaluation of the pros and cons of tiger parenting based on the inherent biological predispositions. Therefore, they cannot tell us that you are unidimensional, for example, or that you will suffer from autonomy if they don't prove to us the link that parents actually meaningfully believe that those sort of these situations will arise as a result of their failed parenting. They don't prove the link to you in this debate about why parents care about these certain outcomes, or they worry about these certain outcomes at the point where they make their parenting decisions. That's the missing link in the negatives case. I want to on the first question on the welfare of the child, right? Firstly, let's talk about how parents actually intermediate their sort of child caring decisions, right? We're gonna give you a couple of very important arguments from second speaker. The first is the idea of risk aversion, right? Like parents, they incredibly exaggerate the risk out there due to the biological imperative. That is to say that parents are heavily biased towards control. The reason for that is because, they will force, be there for their kids when they're young, away from predators, right? But more importantly, this is incredibly important, is that on their side, even if we can buy that parents are aware of the potential downsides of this tiger parenting, right? They have a lot of faith in their own ability to be good parents, and therefore avert these sort of things. This means, for example, if they can see a child has having self-esteem issues, right, then there's no reason to be why the parent cannot boost their self-esteem while also simultaneously having high expectations. They don't prove the exclusivity of denigrating a child on our side of the house. Notice that on that, in the second speaker, the case finally became clear. What you're saying is these parents are incredibly stupid. They were raised in a, let me be clear, their place setting was parents raised in a traditional setting, now thrust into a modern world where many non-traditional paths are now avenues of success. Therefore, parents are completely blindsided. They don't know what's right, and therefore leave complete autonomy in the hands of the child. They don't actually tell us what this really looks like. So let's break this completely ridiculous idea down. First level, I suspect that even if parents believe that they have some degree, of like lack of confidence in what's perfectly right for the child, right? They probably know better than the child, right, on what is right. They probably know certain critical things are probably universally bad for the child and therefore universally good for them to restrict. For example, like engaging with strangers online, right? When you can't just block it at every point. When at the point you give them social media access, right? They open themselves to the risk of meeting like these sort of random strangers online unsupervised by their parents. So there are certain universal things that are pretty good. But you can tell a kid, for example, like I'm not going to prescribe, is being a doctor or a sports prodigy or an artist better, right? But I think telling your kid from the start, you must have goals, you must have aspirations, you must work very hard in all these random hobbies that I send you to, right? Those are probably universally good things that parents know to be good. When the kid is just like, I want to lie in bed, I want to drink milk, I want to sleep. Like, come on now. Like, parents know certain things to be universally good that these children are not able to actively make these decisions on their own behalf. Secondly, like even if parents have misconceptions over what is right? It doesn't matter because as long as the parents impose their own best perception of what is right, they fulfill their own parental goals. This level symmetry occurs on their side of the house, right? Because like presumably on their side, parents make decisions over like, should I send my kid to school or should I homeschool them, right? Should I put them out or should I send them to university, for example? Like the parents actively make decisions imposing their own best beliefs on their kids as well. So it's unclear to me why this is like not symmetric in this debate. But this is the most important thing, right? Like I do not understand why they actually place set this debate in a world where the parents have complete generational gaps between the past generation and the current generation. I suppose to you, right? For example, if parents are in the working world right now, they have a pretty reasonable grasp over reasonable paths out there that the kids can take. They know, maybe they won't know for sure if sports or art is good. In this case, send a kid for both sports and art tuition, right? But they seem to be the case that, if things mildly change from point to point, so their parents are completely paralyzed and left completely clueless what the right thing to do is. This is a fundamental like mischaracterization. I want to note here because they couldn't give you a single concrete example of what these ambiguities look like. It is just pure linguistic like fantasy out there that's not actually concretely grounded in reality. I suppose to the bottom line, even if parents are clueless, they know marginally more than kids. They can make better decisions than kids. And that's what matters from the parents' point of view. Like, let's put it on there. Fine, let's take it on the very, very best grounds, right? Suppose that, they have some degree of control as well. Yeah. We still give you two very important things outside the house. Firstly, you avoid the worst of outcomes like grooming, like drugs, and like kidnapping. I want to make very clear these are our arguments on our side. They can't just say in second speaker, I will stop my kid from speaking to a stranger when they're 10. Why? Because the process begins, for example, when limiting their social media access until they're 15, for example. Not giving them their first phone, their first smartphone with internet access until they're of their age. It means keeping them at home preemptively, like at 7 p.m., to avoid running into rowdy crowds on the street. They can't achieve complete protection on their side of the house, meaning they must concede that there's at least some meaningful delta of reducing these sort of risks on our side of the house. We told you from the first speaker what was so incredibly important. Because our biological imperative is not, about, will he be an artist? Or will he be a bungee jumper? Or will he be a doctor? It is, will he be alive? Like this is the critical comparative that lies in parents' minds when they're risk averse from the very start of this round, right? Secondly, we talk about instilling skills like communication, resilience, and being hardworking. Again, we heard no response from their side of the house. Crucially, these are benefits that exist. Firstly, only by instilling a lot of control by forcing them to these classes from young, right? But secondly, and more importantly, it turns out, did you know that being an art prodigy or being a sports prodigy or being a doctor requires communication, resilience, and being hardworking? Shocker, I had no idea. They gave us two harms in their speeches. Firstly, about parents being unidimensional. Secondly, about lacking autonomy and being brought up in a bubble. I'll note here firstly that on their side, they already concede to situational controls, whatever they may be. This is therefore already wrong on their side of the house. Why? Because we told that on our side, being able to minimize the sort of stress, the sort of expectations, the sort of like control and feeling like lack of autonomy from their very mechanism of being stifled by parental control and parents saying no, right? It's best channeled when you already have expectations set from young that you're being controlled. You know it's reasonable to be controlled from young. Therefore, you're able to process when your parents actually say no when like on the very situational cases you should defend on their side. Fine. No autonomy bubble. Don't know how to set schedule. Okay, fine. I'm going to create a policy, okay? The tiger parent has 1 hour a day set for schedule setting, problem solved. Like, secondly, right, like you go to school, like you need to know, you need to look at the watch, you see the bus comes at 7, and then you wait outside there, the bus comes after the school ends, you take the bus to go back home. Maybe it's a public bus, because we aren't a rich family. You need to know what the bus schedule is like, right? You speak to your friends, they're like, I did my homework today, or I didn't do my homework today, but therefore, as a result, like, I was not able to make my homework. Then you think, I must do homework when I get home. Like, come on now, guys. Like, they talk to people on the street, they talk to people in the schools, talk to their teachers. They probably have live learning lessons on schedule setting in classes. Like, I don't see what is exclusive on their side of the house, right? Secondly, talk about parents being unidimensional, right? But clearly there's a comparative here, right? Like, even if they're unidimensional, they're able to put their kids through these sort of potential experiences. If they own self know that they're unidimensional, then they can own self correct by sending them to the arts classes, to the sports classes, to the med school, for example, and then experience all of these different opportunities and let them taste for themselves what they actually like, never opt into them in the future. So if parents want to avoid unidimensionality, they can tiger parent their child through these sort of different things. Unidimensionality is a parenting like outcome, not a parenting philosophy. But fine, the last thing about parent-child relationships. You say why it wasn't because when you're at 15, right, like it takes serious abuse between your parents and your child to take you out of a family and away from a this sort of situation. Like your the default bias towards caring for your parents. Because when you're 30, you sort of expect to lose your child anyway. But here's a final comparative. On their side, parents will still control their kids and still prefer to run the risk of their kids being pissed at them at the expense of keeping them safe. The fundamental comparative for parents is that they don't care about their parent-child relationship. They care about keeping their children safe. They care about knowing that at night they're at home, in bed, and not in danger. This was only something that government can provide.
Thanking the speaker for the very fine speech, calling upon the third negative speaker, here.
Yep, my name is Dhruv. I'll start in 30 seconds.
Did the speaker disconnect?
I'm sorry. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Alright, so my name is Dhruv Singh, prefer pronouns he slash him. So my internet might get a bit choppy in the middle. So if like my voice is something which is not clear, you can just let me know by interrupting. Whenever like it cuts. Thank you. During my speech in three. During my speech in 3, 2, 1, and go. this is an actor's motion, so the current mindset of the actor is really important within this debate. What is the characterization we give to you that goes unchallenged and unrebutted from the side of the government? And it's really important. Notice that when you're a middle class person, it also means that you're average. It also means that you haven't seen success because you haven't really progressed in your career. Otherwise, you would have a higher salary and you would be upper middle class or upper class in the first place to begin with. Which is to say, the most proximate interactions you have with the structure are ones of failure, are ones of not being able to live up to the expectations that the society or the capitalistic structure has put on you in the first place to begin with. At that point of time, this nuance is really important. Why? Insofar as in your proximate experiences, you haven't seen that success, you don't want to put higher expectations on your child because you couldn't fulfill that expectations yourself in the first place to begin with. Insofar as all of that is true, the current decision making of this parent is of understanding the newer nuances and the newer opportunities and the newer environment better because you failed in a structure, so you want to protect your child from that failure in the first place to begin with. In that, there are a lot of characteristics which are really important. Firstly, as a parent, you're exposed to social media, you're exposed to news, but you're also exposed to the current problems that are existing, which are really different from the problems you faced. Problems probably that you faced were more of stability, were more of jobs. But currently, notice that newer careers are coming up because job market in traditional market is becoming saturated in the first place to begin with. At that point of time, you always, as a middle class parent, get exposed to newer narratives. So you have an understanding that these narratives are something which are approachable, but these are narratives that you can also use in the first place to begin with. But secondarily, there's also a nuance which is important. Notice that as a tiger parent, probably probably your own parent also like involved tiger parenting with you, but even if that's not true, you probably have seen situations around you where probably your friend is someone who tiger parented a child but is also now suffering from the consequences of it. Which is to say, insofar as you are engaged with social media, you probably have seen certain interviews of child who literally blame their parent on the problems that they are facing. You want to protect yourself from that because you don't want to be blamed, but you also want your child to succeed in a sustainable manner in the first place to begin with. At all points of time, you want to ensure that your child is able to not just grow, but grow holistically in the first place. Thirdly, parents have optimistic bias, and that's why it's important. We don't think that's true, right? Because insofar as you are a middle class person, you haven't seen that success. At that point of time, you don't have an optimistic bias, you have a pessimistic bias, because you also want to ensure that your child doesn't face the same barriers or the same harms that you did. So you want to protect your child from that in all circumstances. I want to take an even if, which is really, really important within this debate. We concede that trade-off. Probably in our side of the world, the child faces more problems. But notice the nature of this problem. This is crucial. Obviously, you aren't going to put your child in like life-threatening situations, right? Because even a rational parent in our side of the world who is a little liberal isn't going to put your child in like harm's way in terms of them getting injured or death. What this means in our side of the world is that the child probably faces some problems in their scheduling, what they want to do, what hobbies they want to take, what societies they want to enter. We are okay with the child facing these problems insofar as we are able to protect the child from the longer consequences that are existing in the side of the government. And that is what we're trying to do within this debate in the first place. But some key pieces of rebuttals, then I'll start bringing this debate. Firstly, in terms of child grooming and unsafe situations, notice that child grooming doesn't happen from strangers. It happens from the people around you. 90% of people or child who face sexual abuse, they face it from their relatives. Why is that important? This is important because you as a child need to be comfortable with your parents and letting them know the problems that are actually occurring with you in the first place. What happens on Gov side of the world? If you actually get groomed by your relative, you are less likely to let your parents know because you're scared of them, because you don't have a healthy relationship with that parent, because you're scared of punishment in the first place to begin with. So when you face that abuse from the relative and not in a random stranger situation, you're less likely to go to your parent. The harms of that is you're more likely to internalize the harms in and of itself, and that's what we're trying to protect you from in the first place to begin with. The problem that government has is that our case is uncertain because we cannot be sure of a child's reaction. Let's make our case certain on three metrics. Firstly, we think it's human reaction to get angry and resentful when you're punished, when high expectations are put on you as a child. Which is to say, when you get punished and you are immature as a child, you are going to get resentful and angry because it's just human nature because you are immature as a child in the first place. Secondarily, when you see other kids having fun, other kids leading a good social life, you start blaming your parents for it. This experience is the most proximate and the certain thing to every single kid who is in tiger parenting and is not uncertain at all. But thirdly, we think teenagers in general seek independence. They are risk-taking in nature and they want to get stimulated. Insofar as you try to curb all of these like incentives of these like children, what happens is they are certainly on a certainty metric bound to get like frustrated, resentful, and angry against you in the first place to begin with. What is the clash that they want to win on, and why do we win this debate in the first place? The clash they want to win on is, oh, we'll increase the child's performance. Well, we have competing analysis. Why? Because if everything is being controlled in your life, the child is probably going to get overwhelmed, which is to say, if you have high expectations on you, your performance not increases, it decreases, because you don't have the capacity to deal with the higher expectations that are on you. Because as a child, you are young and malleable in the first place. What this analysis proves is that like performance increase even on their side of the world is uncertain in the first place. But secondarily, even insofar as your self-worth and your identity is something which can get harmed, your capacity to perform also decreases, because if you're not in a mental state to perform, you cannot actually perform. Notice what this does is it makes the claims of the government really, really speculative in our side of the world, in their side of the world. But we will take the best case scenario and we will weigh, even if performance gets a little better, why it's not the most important thing. Let's assume that the child's performance increases. Why is that trade-off still not worth it? On two metrics. Firstly, notice that insofar as even if the child is more successful, but the child is more insecure, or the child faces self-worth harms in and of itself to begin with, this is really, really bad, because the impact of self-worth and identity is really, really huge. What is that? There are three things within this. Firstly, notice that insofar as you're not secure within your identity, you cannot be happy with the success that you have. Notice that we are prior to the side government. Even if the child gets success in future, if the child is insecure, he cannot internalize the success that the child is getting. The impact of that is, even if the child is earning high amounts of payment, high amounts of salary, if I'm insecure in my identity, I cannot be happy about the salary I'm earning. Which is to say, the utility maximization can never occur on government, even when you increase their performance in the first place. But secondarily, notice that self-identity is the most important. Why? Because it literally determines the utility that you get in other aspects of your life. If you're not confident, you cannot really enjoy relationships. You cannot enjoy other social interactions. So this is the most proximate indicator of utility maximization that government is sacrificing at the cost of like utility maximization. The second metric that we win on is the relationship with your child. Notice, and why is this important? Why is this a priority to you? We think parents in general are self-preservatory in nature, which is to say, even though they care about their child, we don't think like it's really unconditional, because we have grown up in a capitalistic society. You have certain expectations that you want your child to fulfill in the first place to begin with. Why is all of this important? Because on Gov's side of the world, you are trading off the long-term relationship that you have with your child. Because insofar as the child is angry and resentful towards you, they are not going to maintain a long-term relationship with you in the first place. Why is that bad on three weighing metrics? Firstly, in terms of longevity, insofar as this harms the long-term relationship that you have with your child, this is something which matters to you, because on the time scale, this is something which is very long. But secondarily, there is no alternative that is available to it. Insofar as the harm has been occurred, you cannot solve that harm, because this harm is of layered trauma that the child has faced. But thirdly, when you get old, you don't want to be lonely. You want to have someone you can depend on. So if you're self-preservatory in nature, you want the child to succeed, but you also care about your relationship more than the child's success, even at the cost of that child's performance. Very
Thanking the speaker for the very fine speech, calling upon the reply speaker from side negative. Here.
Hi, still audible and visible?
Yes.
Starting speech in 3, 2, 1. A lot has been said in this debate. Let's try and simplify this into one simple thing. This debate is probably said at a time when the parent has to make a calculated decision in terms of which sort of parent to necessarily apply for their child, at a time when they're probably deciding the metrics of their parenting. We think the most important thing at that point of time is what are the current things which the parent is fully aware of, and what are they including in this decision-making calculus. We have two things to explain to you within this. One, we explained to you in our setup that this parent is somebody who's from the middle class, who's probably not seen highest amount of success, and has probably regularly seen other people probably go over them, get more promotions, get more salary at every point of time. That basically means the application of their own skills and metrics, they have actively seen them fail. They have actively seen how their metrics are probably not as dynamic as the current generation's metric, who are overtaking them in their jobs at all points of times. The impact we prove within this is fairly simple. We prove to you why the parent is fully aware about these metrics not being as adaptable to current situations and times, which are the crucial thing which children of today's generation probably require. But if that's not enough, then second is something which we kill within this debate. We tell you, liberal circles within today on social media, on any media channels, talk to you about one very simple thing. They have multiple levels of interviews and multiple levels of stories about children coming up and talking about how their parents probably over controlled their lives, and that's the reason why they have not been fully independent in today's world and have not been fully successful. They've actively blamed the parents because they have no freedom in the first place. The problem with this is that as a parent, you have seen these examples in front of you. You have seen this interview as soon as you open Instagram, which means self-preservation is something which kicks in instantly. And this is why it's most important. We think self-preservation is universal. A good parent or a bad parent, probably at all points of time, does not want their own thing to be harmed or their own relationship with the child to be harmed or for them to feel guilty because they want to preserve the most thing proximate to them, which is their own self-identity. Insofar as this is true, which is unchallenged by the side affirmative, one thing is fairly proven in this debate and simple to understand, that there are more examples of children failing because of over-controlling parents than probably examples of that over-controlling and tiger parenting necessarily working in a fruitful manner. The reason why this impacts the parents' decision is because we argue, insofar as this is true, we think the parents would want to not adopt tiger parenting in order to not only not feel guilty, but also to have a better dynamic with their children at all points of times. The second thing I wanted to come to is why strategically affirmative loses this debate. A large part of their three speeches revolves around one simple claim towards us, that, oh, a lot of our impacts are probably future based, which means they're never likely because it's all nothing which is necessarily proven. But I wanted to gut check this. A majority part of side affirmative's case is better skills for the child and more success for the child. You know where that's set? In the future, which means this proves that most of the harms they want to point out within our case are probably reflective of their own analysis in the first place. But it's even more crucial. Note all these things, like in terms of better skills and probably success rates, depends on one very simple thing: the narrative you see right now. Which means if they were arguing these two things, they had to prove one burden to you. Why is it that the parents today are probably seeing more examples of success of tiger parenting, which is why they want to apply it in today's world rather than seeing bad examples of it? Insofar as you've substantially proven the reverse of it in the first place, that you see more bad examples of it, I think they're fully aware that they don't have the metrics to probably fulfill the likelihood of success for their children. Insofar as that is true, a majority part of side affirmative's case is actually also very, very unpredictable and insufficient to prove why it's going to be likely in all circumstances, which means on these two metrics, we seal this debate. But further, we also tell you things like dependency on parents and why social skills require you to be multidimensional and have the autonomy in certain situations. The only response they want to talk about in their three speeches is that, oh, what happens when your child talks to a stranger? You know what happens? What happens with a basic parent? They will want to step in and protect them. But what they don't want to do is micro schedule every single interaction of the child and control everything, because then you have more reasons for the child to go and blame the parent in the future when things go wrong and have disturbances within this relationship. We think we are the only side which is the most certain in its impacts in this debate as compared to side affirmative, which has problems in terms of what they raise against us applying to their own case. Never been prouder to oppose.
Thanking the speaker for the very fine speech, calling upon the reply speaker from side affirmative. Here.
Testing, can I be heard? Testing, can I be heard?
Yes, you can.
Thank you. Let's take a look at what basic reasonable parenting on side opposition looks like. It looks like parents at the age of 10, when their child talks to a stranger, they step in, they kick back control. This concedes that control matters. I want to look how this impacts the rest of the arguments as well. Under the death of the house, kids who feel that their autonomy is being violated will still feel angry and suffocated. Parents who don't know what is best for the children, according to them, these people are still in charge of their kids' lives, about whom they can or cannot talk to. Self-preservation, the thing that he pivoted to in third and reply, that is something that is still being impacted by their very argument. At the end of the day, the very kind of parenting that they wanted to advocate for considered those facts. But here is where our side is different. On their side of the house, when they tell a 10-year-old that they have been in the wrong direction, their words have no weight because they have not been used to those kind of norms where parents are the ones at the top of the hierarchy. Under our side, when kids have been socialized and are used to it, they can understand it when their parents are enforcing those kinds of norms. That is why on our side, we have basic parenting. On their side, they have weak parenting. That is why in the US, 28% of children disown their parents as well. This is not something that is exclusive to our side of the house. Let's look at the harms that their side has talked about, which were really, really many. They tell us parents have no knowledge, people don't feel good about themselves, they feel suffocated, etc. All of these things are speculative. But here's the thing, let's accept that those harms are true. Let's say the parent-child relation is perhaps a little bit stifled. Let's say perhaps the child doesn't really feel assured of himself in the world. But this is a price that any parent would pay if their child does not get kidnapped, if their child does not face the worst harms of assault late into the night. There's I only responded to one example, grooming. But I suspect that if your relative is grooming you and you go to your uncle's house 4 times a week, that is when we are actually able to detect it. Now, under both sides of the house, under their side, I suspect that the child is probably unwilling to divulge it anyways. The harms that we talked to you about were visceral and the way was certain. Under our side of the house, we were able to prevent a 1 in 100 chance and make it a 1 in a million. Under our side, if we really bought the argument about how we don't really know what happens in the future, this is precisely the argument that you should care about in this debate. But let's move on to the very nitty-gritty harms their side advocated to us. They tell us parents don't know what knowledge is needed in the world right now. Here's the thing, there's has to assess the comparative. The question is not whether or not a 20-year-old is better at knowing what the world is like. It's about whether or not the child knows any better, and the child really doesn't. In fact, what we have shown you down the bench is that tiger parenting can build universally good skills that are time immemorial. Discipline, skills, order, etc. Then they say kids feel suffocated. Response, normalization. They are socialized into being able to accept, recognize, and love tiger parenting. At the end of the day, people who have liberal parents as well don't have parents who are their best friends because people don't build their identities around their parents. It's around their schools, their friends, their playmates, their networks. Therefore, feeling insecure about your identity, something that really actually only came up in the reply, that is actually something that we actually repeat under our side as well. Overdependence. Our side creates the opportunities to counteract overdependence because kids, for example, now can go to camps, school programs, which oftentimes you need grades to get into. But here's the nuance that their side never dealt with. They assume that tiger parents were simply stupid parents. At the end of the day, our side uses a sliding scale, as most parents do, becoming more liberal, for example, at milestones 14, 16, 18, a nuance they never dealt with. Self-esteem, not feeling good enough. Under our side of the house, you know you are not a failure when your parent tells you you can succeed. When under their side of the house, we actually really equip them with the ability to deal with failure. For example, sending them to many lessons, being able to expose them to things that are good and not good at. Unidimensionalism. Our side deals with this because parents are able to recognize if their kid is better at something that they were not at. The fact is, in order to buy their case, you have to buy a very specific characterization. You have to buy that these parents went through tiger parenting and was failed by it. You have to believe that these parents really can't govern their children. At the end of the day, we are proud to stand on the fact that parents could look their child in the eye and tell them that they want their life to be better than mine. And that is what we're proud to propose.
Thanking the speaker for the very fine speech. I just needed a confirmation from side affirmative. Could I please know who was your reply speaker?